Welcome in, everybody. Happy Monday, one and all, January 22nd, 2024. Rob Ellis, Bill Colarulo hanging out with us today. Bill, appreciate you, man, hanging out with us. Always good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Some good football yesterday. It was a little depressing that you're not watching the Eagles play, but other than that, some good football. It was good to see Jason Kelce having some fun.
Yes, he was living his best life yesterday, that's for sure, man. At first, he's out with the Bills Mafia drinking out of a half bowling ball, doing shots, and then he's up in the suite going shirtless. And Taylor Swift's never seen anything like that, Bill. I could tell you that much. But welcome to the family, Taylor. That's for sure.
You're not kidding. And Taylor Swift, man, like, I don't even get annoyed with her. It's the broadcast. Like, why are you, as soon as the Chiefs score, why do you immediately flash to Taylor Swift every single time? It was like they weren't even showing the players celebrate. It was literally immediate to Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Ratings, baby. Ratings, baby. To follow the money trail, Bill, when in doubt, when in question. All right. So, man, not only were they I thought it was a highly entertaining weekend for the most part, but certainly entertaining games yesterday. That's for sure. And, you know, the nightcap was just absolutely awesome. And we're going to dive really hard into the games themselves. But during the games yesterday, multiple reports, a lot of stuff fast and furious flying out. First, Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network. The wording of the tweet essentially was that Nick Sirianni has fired Sean Desai. I think the wording is critical here, if you want to read into things, because it wasn't the Eagles, it wasn't Jeffrey Lurie, it wasn't Howie Roseman, it was Nick Sirianni. So I want to start with that. No surprise that Desai is out. And by the way, Matt Patricia is no longer under contract, so it would not be a firing. It would just be a walk away from his contract thing. But let's start with that, with the wording of that one.
Yeah.
Does that lead you to believe that Nick is back? Because we're likely not going to hear any official word, Bill, because he's also still under contract. So how did you read into that?
Yeah, I read it the same way you did, that he's back. And there was a good article by Florio on Pro Football Talk last week about this very thing, that you're probably not going to hear Jeffrey Lurie or Howie Roseman announce that Sirianni's job is safe, because that's not the way the Eagles organization really runs things. They're not Jerry Jones. They're not going to come out after every time a coach loses in the playoffs and say his job's safe. They're looking at it as, we don't need to say anything because it's obvious he's coming back. And if they do acknowledge that there was even a question of him coming back, then how does that look? So I think this is exactly the way the Eagles wanted to play it. They're not going to make a formal announcement, and we're all just going to assume it because of things like that. Oh, well, Sirianni fired Sean Desai. Sirianni and Howie Roseman are looking for coordinator replacements. We also heard that report as well last week. So I think Sirianni's coming back. And right after the game, Rob, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this. Right after the game against the Bucs, I was angry. And I'm like, they can't bring him back. They got to fire him. And then as 48 hours passed and I took a look at the entire picture of things, I changed my mind. And I said, he deserves to come back for another year. When you look at the total picture, I do think it would be a knee-jerk. As bad as things were and as bad of a job as he did at the end of that season, I think he should come back. I really do.
Look, I was a lean towards letting him go guy, but not just a over the top smashing my fist on the console kind of guy with that. So here's where I stand with it. I'm okay with Sirianni coming back, but this has to be the first of two moves. Brian Johnson can't come back.
Agreed.
Now, you can blame it, certainly, and it's fair if you want to say that Nick Sirianni was drawing this stuff up during the week and it was hot garbage. And I agree with that. But I don't think Brian Johnson helped anything. In fact, I think he compounded the issues. So I think he needs to be gone. But what I want in his place, in his stead, Bill, I want somebody to come in here, scheme it, and call it. Guess what, Nick? You want to be a CEO? You're going to be a CEO. But you're not as involved in the day-to-day game plan that week heading into Sunday. The person who's calling the plays will be. That, to me, like if you come back, if you run this back with Brian Johnson, and it's the same sort of philosophy or method, I have zero faith that this is going to work next year. I have zero faith that you're going to recapture what you had with Hurts last year. I mean, in 2022, when I say last year, I have zero faith in any of that if you run it back on the offensive side. Where do you fall on that?
I agree with you. I said that. I said, I want Sirianni to come back, but don't sell me on we're running it back with Brian Johnson because we did finish with a top 10 offense. And you're right. If Sirianni is going to be the CEO coach, which you could be successful, look at the Ravens. Harbaugh's a CEO type coach. Dan Campbell's not calling plays in Detroit.
Yep.
Mike Tomlin doesn't call plays. So, I mean, you can have success as a CEO coach, but I agree. Let's bring in an offensive coordinator that's going to be able to really scheme things up and help Jalen Hurts. But when I looked at Sirianni, and the reason I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, Rob, is we were really asking him to do something that no coach in NFL history has ever done, and that's go to a Super Bowl, lose both of your coordinators, and then try to get back. There's only been 6 coaches ever to even get back. None of them lost both coordinators. And the only 2 teams that ever went to a Super Bowl and lost both coordinators were the 2005 Patriots, who, by the way, had Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, couldn't get out of the divisional round. The 1995 San Francisco 49ers, who had George Seifert and Hall of Famer Steve Young and couldn't get out of the divisional round. So for me, when you look at it and say, because he couldn't do something that no one else has ever been able to do, he's fired. He's gone. Even when Howie Roseman made some really bad mistakes on the defensive side of the ball. Not absolving Sirianni. He needs to be better. It wasn't good. I just don't think you knee-jerk and say he's gone because of one bad year.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, the track record of what's happened here with as you mentioned, with the people trying to repeat, it's not a coincidence. There's far too many teams. It's a long and unfortunately rich history of this kind of thing. There was also a very fascinating article from Ralph Vacchiano from Fox Sports that laid out a couple different things in the body of it. And it discussed essentially staff choices. One of them being the choice to go with Denard Wilson, or to not go with Denard Wilson and choose Sean Desai. Now, we're going to talk to Jeff McClain at 11:30 from the Inquirer, who's always got his pulse on a lot of what's going on here, right? I'm curious ultimately, because I've seen many different things written and speculated about whose choice that was, whether it was Howie's choice, whether it was Nick's choice, whatever. But clearly, there were mistakes made on that side of the ball. Not only did he discuss that, but he talked about how Hurts was unhappy with the offense, which was part of the reason why we got the late season ad libs that we got. And maybe even his relationship with Brian Johnson had soured a bit, which could, lead to it not being as big a deal as some people maybe make it out to be with Brian Johnson moving on. This one was pretty hard hitting and pretty telling about some of the issues that went on behind the scenes.
That's the one major concern I have is Sirianni, as much as I'm saying bring him back, is one of the things we thought he did so well was building a strong culture, that you weren't going to have these type of issues, that you weren't going to have these things where there's not the coach and the players aren't seeing eye to eye. I never expected to start hearing leaks coming from the locker room. D Gunn a few weeks ago talking about how players were saying that the offense is predictable. You have, AJ Brown refusing to talk to the media for a couple of weeks. Like, there was just some weird things going on. And yeah, I am looking forward to talking to McClain, because I've been waiting for the Jeff McClain article to come out, laying it all out about all the differences that these coaches and players had, because he always seems to find something. He does a great job with that, but we'll see. And then there was another article by, I'm forgetting the name now, for Bleeding Green Nation with regard
Joe
to
Santaliquido. Joe's going to join us tomorrow. Joe will be on at 11:30 tomorrow. Joe will.
Yeah, about Jalen Hurts' leadership. And when there was an article that came out even a few weeks ago, or a report that the Eagles wanted Jalen Hurts to be a more vocal leader, that there was some question marks about his leadership. And that was during the regular season. And I even reached out to a few people inside the organization and said, hey, this is BS, right? This is being overstated. And they confirmed. They said, no, as great of a guy as Jalen Hurts is, and he's a great young kid, he does need to do a little bit more to be a vocal leader, because he is. That's kind of the way he is. He's guarded.
Yeah.
You heard Covey say he's not approachable. And I think he'll get better with that. I don't think Jalen Hurts is Carson Wentz. I don't like the comparisons because I do think he's a different person. I think he's a different quarterback. And I think he'll figure out a way to be a better leader going forward.
Yeah. So, and Joe made it clear in the article, like, this is not, teammates don't view him the same way they viewed him as they viewed Carson Wentz. But he did talk about how he's less accessible, partly because after he signed the contract, there were a lot of hands out. And this happens to a lot of professional athletes where, cousins you didn't even know you had are suddenly hitting you up for loans, right? Where you got, for a guy who's already got a pretty close quarters to begin with, I think he tightened the circle even more. Problem with that is when you're inside the locker room, if you appear, the appearance of this, if you come off as a bit, I'm not even going to say aloof. I think that's too strong a word, but as a guy who maybe isn't open as he could be at that position, it's tough. Like, you can be that way at left guard. You can be that way at defensive tackle. Nobody cares. Nobody pays much attention to it. Unfortunately, and this is why you get the big bucks too, there's a spotlight on you at that position. And Jalen has it, shining loud and clear. There's a lot going on. And Joe supported a lot of it with numbers too, in terms of, the passes between the hashes, which were only 5.2%, which is an incredible, minuscule number. 27% verticals, which means a lot of deep shots. 42nd out of 45 qualified quarterbacks in holding the ball too long. Like, there's a lot in there to support it. It's not just speculation with anonymous sources. So, yeah, I mean, this is part of what you have to ask yourself too, is whomever you bring in, and there's been names like Jim Bob Cooter floated around, whoever you bring in, it first and foremost, at least as far as I'm concerned, is it better be with the strict edict of fixing Jalen Hurts, and you better be sure that person can do it.
Yeah, when you're paying Jalen Hurts $250 million, he's not going anywhere. So it better be a coach that can do it. And do you know any Jim Bobs? I was talking about that on my show before. I've never met a Jim Bob.
No,
definitely not from South Philly. Jim Bob.
No, there's no Jim Bobs. There was no Jim Bobs in Delco. No, it was, yeah. You know what? I'm going to go old school on you here, Bill. For our younger folks, look it up. But that strikes me as a name of somebody on the Dukes of Hazzard, which was an old TV show in the 70s and 80s where they were in like Arkansas driving around in, their crazy car anyway. But yeah, it's, look, his track record's decent. The name does not instill confidence, if I'm being real, in an Eastern city. But whomever it is, the other thing I was a little bit encouraged by, they're also, again, you got to take all of this with a grain of salt. There's speculation that they may go a different direction defensively, and even a name like Wink Martindale was being thrown out there. So when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, this is a real departure from the bend don't break, we're just not going to give up the big play kind of thing. If that's the case, I'm heartened by the fact that they're looking at things a little bit differently, at one NovaCare way. Like, let's change it up a little bit. Maybe let's be a little bit more aggressive. Maybe the way we've been doing it hasn't worked, so we got to change it up.
The interesting thing is, and I know fans want the Eagles to be more aggressive. Everybody loves blitzing. We're still in love with the Buddy Ryan, gangrene defenses. But you look at Wink Martindale over the last couple of seasons, and even though he blitzes pretty much more than anybody in the NFL, number 2 this year, number 1 last year, it's not like their defenses have been that good.
No.
I mean, you look at this season, the Giants, even though they blitzed more than anybody in the league with the exception of the Minnesota Vikings, they finished 27th in yards against. They weren't number 1 in takeaways, which I like, but I'm not sure that blitzing that much is the answer. Do I want them to be a little bit more aggressive? Yes. But that much more aggressive? I'm not sure that's the answer in today's NFL.
Yeah, like, this is the thing with the blitz thing. And I get it. It's fun. Like, it's fun to just go, all out like they do. We were all weaned on Buddy and Jim Johnson and all that, who were very aggressive guys. You better have the personnel to be able to handle it. Yeah. If you're going to blitz, you better have corners and safeties and linebackers who can handle themselves in one-on-one coverage, because there's going to be more bodies going towards the quarterback, less bodies in coverage. It's natural math here. And if you're asking me if this team, who couldn't handle coverage when you were giving them help, can handle blitzing type coverage, not right now. You better upgrade your personnel or change your personnel if you're going to do that.
I'm glad you say linebacker, Rob, and we could talk about this more later in the show, but the reports that Howie Roseman didn't even pick up the phone to call TJ Edwards. Clay Harbor reports that this weekend. And then they go into the season with the linebacking crew that they had. To me, I think Howie Roseman's not getting enough heat. Everyone's talking about firing Nick Sirianni. I don't think you fire Howie Roseman. I think he's a good GM, but he better learn from the mistakes he made this offseason by ignoring key positions like linebacker and safety and trying to piecemeal it with guys late in the season. Didn't work out. And you look at who's still playing in the NFL tournament, some pretty damn good linebackers on these other teams. Right?
So 2 takeaways I had from the weekend, in addition to just I know the Eagles, and we heard that ad nauseum from people. Do you believe the Eagles beat these teams? Yeah, I know they did. But what I watched this weekend was teams that had stellar linebacker play and teams that were willing to run the ball and stay with it. Even having, explosive wide receivers. They were 2 of my takeaways from this weekend that just stood out. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because at 12 o'clock after Jeff McClain, we're going to walk through Howie's moves this offseason. That includes the draft. That includes trades. That includes free agencies. And I'll tell you right now, it ain't a good grade, okay, even a little bit. So we're going to walk through that because honestly, if you assess this thing, I think Jalen Carter is going to be a beast. I know he slowed down, but I am a huge Jalen Carter fan. Other than maybe Sidney Brown, you got very little from your draft. You got very little other than DeAndre Swift from your free agencies and free agent moves and your trades. So we'll dive into that. But yeah, I think that that's why I really hope, and this is something we always get back to because the Eagles tend to, under Howie, have extreme highs and extreme lows. Extreme lows is probably a bit of a stretch. They have extreme highs and then there's a fall off. And this year was a fall off. Okay. So what you have to try to find is some middle ground here where you don't, go through the floor and end up in the basement when you're on the 3rd floor. And that's the thing I think they have to figure out. Why is that? Why is there such a high variance a lot of times? And I hope that Jeffrey isn't so tightly woven with Howie that he has the ability to say, hey man, what are we doing here? Why did this happen? What are you doing to change philosophically? How are we going about this? And I hope that that's the case. I don't know that that's the case. And that troubles me.
Yeah, I posted a video this weekend on this very thing that as great as Super Bowl 52 was, one of the greatest days of my life as an Eagles fan, being there, watching it, I'll never forget it. But I think in a lot of ways that emboldened Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, that their arrogance now is kind of through the roof, that we can do this. We don't need to pay linebackers. We don't need to pay safeties. We'll go out there and we'll find somebody. We did it in 2017. We found a 1-year deal that worked. We did it and got it to the Super Bowl in 2022, getting some 1-year deals with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. We'll just do it again. And the problem is that what we saw this year, that's not always going to work out. You're not always going to be able to find a player, especially late in training camp like they tried to do, or late into the season like they tried to do. And then you got all these new players that you brought in on these 1-year deals on defense. You got a new defensive coordinator, and then you also decide to change that defensive coordinator midway through the season. So I just hope that they don't look at it and say, oh, this was just the outlier. We've done this before. We can do it again.
Right.
But I think when you really look, and we'll talk more about how he's moves this offseason, I really think where this all started was 4 years ago. Because if you look at his draft picks dating all the way back to 2019, they've missed way too much on the defensive side of the football. He's done a good job with D-tackle. We know he can draft D-tackles. It's every other position. So you can't expect all your rookies this year, even though I do think some of these guys are promising with Sidney Brown and Keely Ringo and Jalen Carter. If you truly had Super Bowl aspirations, what you needed was guys who were still playing on that 4-year rookie deal. You needed guys you drafted 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, contributing on defense, and you just didn't have it. There was really a real lack of young talent that you drafted and developed, and that's why it makes it so much more frustrating that they let homegrown talent like Edwards and Epps walk.
Yeah, there are positions that Howie and his scouting group just do not identify well. Corner's one of them. That's why you had to sign Bradbury. That's why you had to trade for Slay. Linebacker's one of them. You counted on Nakobe Dean this year, and Nakobe Dean didn't play well, just couldn't stay on the field. And they've ignored the position in a big way as well. Even edge, like, yes, Sweat has turned out to be a player, no doubt. But although had a terrible finish to the season, but you had to go out and sign Hassan Reddick, and you're probably going to have to make a decision on Hassan Reddick because he enters the last year of his deal in 2024. And I guarantee you, he's going to want to have a conversation with the front office as he goes into the last year of his deal.
And he's got a big cap hit too, so they probably want to do something. I'm hoping it's restructure and keep him, but you never know what they may do.
You don't know. So that's another area. That the thing that worried me too, just to stay on that for a minute. The thing that worried me, it's really been about a 3-year thing. The Eagles have had a lot of people poached from their front office. Andy Weidel, Andrew Berry, just to name a few, Joe Douglas, just to name a few. There's been a lot more than that, but that's the headliners. And eventually it's like anything else. You keep taking away coordinators. Does that hurt the head coach? You keep losing players in free agency. Does that hurt the team? How much of that is it's really hard to replace good people versus you just didn't bring in the right people, if you're Howie. So that dates back to the time period that you're talking about here, Bill, not just last year, a few years back as well. And I think maybe we're seeing that come to a head also.
Yeah, and you mentioned Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat, they drafted in 2018. Listen to the edge rushers that they've drafted since that 2018 draft. Yeah. 2019, they drafted Sharif Miller. He's not even in the league anymore.
No. Philly kid, went to Penn State, bust. Yep.
2020, they draft Casey Toohill. Well, he's now on the Washington Commanders, never contributed to the Eagles. 2021, Teron Jackson, he's on your practice squad. Patrick Johnson, pretty much just a special teams
player.
A guy. So now you're getting nothing from those edges. 2022, Kyron Johnson, he's now on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then in 2023, they take Nolan Smith, who I'm not ready to rule a bust. It's only 1 year, but he didn't give you much this year. So now, for the last 4 years, really 5 drafts, you've gotten nothing from the edge rushers that you've drafted. And that's why you look this season, there was no depth. Behind Reddick and Sweat, they had nobody. I know people are going to say why they let Derek Barnett walk. I was fine with letting Barnett walk. He did nothing here. I think the mistake was bringing him back when you brought him back this offseason. You could have brought
somebody else in for depth at that position.
They should have. So frustrating.
No, listen, you're right. I mean, everything you're saying is correct, and that stuff catches up to you. You can make a couple of really heady moves on 1-year deals and bring guys in and have great seasons. We saw it in 2017. We saw it last year being 2022. We saw it, and Howie hit on a lot of those. And that's how you kind of survive that. But eventually, if you don't draft well, I don't care what team it is, it's going to catch up to you. It just is. It's going to bite you eventually. And it's biting them now. And, now we sit here, we're on the precipice of them having to make a decision, or they maybe already made their decision on Nick Sirianni. And we're starting to see the staff moves. And what I really wonder about is if Brian Johnson doesn't get a head coaching gig, I know he's interviewing for some. If he doesn't get the head coaching gig that he's looking for, is he back? Or are you willing to fire him as well? Like, here's my thought, Bill. They're not going to do anything right now as to hurt his chances to get a head coaching gig. So there might be a bit of delay there. The only problem is with delaying there and trying to do right by him, you could be losing out on other offensive coordinators who could go elsewhere. That's the tricky part of this.
And I think I saw a report this morning that the Carolina Panthers are no longer interested.
They are. He's not interviewing there. That's correct.
So that was a spot I could have seen him going, only because I don't know anybody who is a good candidate that wants to coach for Dave Tepper. So I was hoping maybe.
I mean, that's just a matter of I want to be a head coach in the NFL if you're dealing with his nonsense. Yeah.
But you're right. They may be missing out on some other offensive coordinators. And it's alarming because we've seen the success that Shane Steichen had. And I think that's why there's no surprise they're looking at Jim Bob, because of his experience with Shane Steichen. He's his offensive coordinator right now. He was a consultant with him in 2021 here on the Eagles. He was the passing game coordinator in 2022 with Doug Peterson. So there's a lot of familiarity here with Jim Bob Cooter. But I'll tell you one thing I have a problem with Jim Bob. in addition to his name, Rob. But one of the problems I have with him is you look back when he was calling plays, because he doesn't call plays in
No,
Indianapolis.
Steichen does. And that's why he's allowed to make that move, by the way. Some people may say, well, it's a lateral
I thought it could get blocked.
It can, but I would guess Steichen would let him go if he's going to be his own.
Because he doesn't call play. Yeah, I think they technically
you
could block.
I think, but most teams, I don't see Steichen doing that, but you never know. But I'm sorry, get to your point.
But yeah, I think they could technically block him. But yeah, I agree. I think they would let him only because he'd have the luxury of being able to call plays here. But you look back when he was calling plays for the Detroit Lions, 2 years under Jim Caldwell, 1 year under Matt Patricia, interestingly enough. 2016, they had the 30th ranked rushing offense. 2017, the 32nd ranked rushing offense. And 2018, the 23rd ranked rushing offense. And I was talking to our buddy Jody Mack over the weekend about it, and he made a good point, though. He said, well, who are his running backs? Because he didn't have any good running backs, but even still, it's a little alarming.
Yeah.
Because I want a guy, I don't want you to run the ball 50 times, but we saw this year what happens when you're not balanced, and that concerns me that he's had such bad rushing offenses in his career.
I agree, and there's a lot of different ways you could look at it. They were a garbage team, so they're probably trailing a lot. They have to throw a lot. Maybe that falls in, into that. Yep. I'd like to look at their rushing attempts to see what that looks like as well. But you're right, it's not a stat that gets me excited. I can tell you that much. All right, so let's hit it. Let's come back. Jeff McLean's going to join us from the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's Bill Colarulo. I am Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I want to tell you about Bravo Pizza of Havertown. Yes, I've been going there since I was a kid. They've been family owned since 1985. You got Alex and the crew in there each and every single week, putting out the absolute best food possible. They have 20 different styles of pizza. They have slices to go. They have the specialized pizza. However you want it, they will make it. But you're not up for pizza. Guess what? Fresh pasta, sandwiches, wraps, wings, salads. Bravo Pizza of Havertown is also committed to the community. They have fundraisers for charities, schools, little leagues, where the proceeds go to those organizations. You can follow them at the Bravo Pizza of on Instagram and Facebook for daily specials and promotions. They're located at 1305 Westchester Pike, Manoa Shopping Center, Havertown, Pennsylvania, 1305 Westchester Pike, Manoa Shopping Center, Havertown, PA. Give them a call, 610-446-3810, 610-446-3810, Bravo Pizza of Havertown.